Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and welcome to the second season opening performance of the Tampa Bay Symphony, now in its 37th season, with over 80 members on stage. I'm Dr. Louis Allen Zagar, and it's my honor to be your MC for today. A little housekeeping before we begin. May we direct your attention to your programs, which provide a wealth of information, not only about this and future performances, but also ways in which you can add your continuing financial support to this wonderful orchestra. Today's program is entitled Heroes and Villains. Features three unique works: the iconic Third Symphony of Beethoven, the Eroica, our hero, and the mesmerizing Night on Bald Mountain by Modeste Mussorgsky, depicting the demonic winged villain known as Chernobog, taken from Slavic mythology and even made famous in the Disney film Fantasia. Rounding out the program is The Laws of Motion by contemporary Australian composer Angus Davison. No doubt you will be learning more about each piece from our conductor during the performance. Okay, all that being said, please bear with me for the next 2.5 minutes before the program begins. Several years ago, I'd read a lengthy biography of perhaps one of the most brilliant minds the world has ever known, every bit the equal of a Sir Isaac Newton or a Galileo. During the author's research, he discovered that when his subject stepped away from his famous chalkboard, filled with calculations and theories that helped solve many scientific puzzles, he retired to his study, picked up his beloved violin, and played the music of Bach, Vivaldi, Mozart, and yes, Beethoven, and often to the wee hours of the morning. And why was this so important to this man of science? He said, and I quote, "Playing my violin allows me to indulge myself in the highest form of personal and cultural expression known to mankind." How's that for a statement? So, who actually was this genius who spoke those rather profound words? As you may have guessed, none other than Albert Einstein. And that brings us to the orchestra now seated on stage in front of you, your Tampa Bay Symphony. For those of you in the audience new to this ensemble, it is a wonderful all-volunteer musical mosaic comprised of individuals of every walk of life, profession, and personal calling who come together each week in rehearsal and finally in stage performance to share that same highest form of cultural expression known to mankind. No pressure there, right? But if you know anything about how a piece of mosaic art is actually assembled, perhaps like those seen in ancient Rome, after the artist meticulously arranges a myriad of tiny tiles to fulfill his or her artistic vision, it is not until that last exquisite piece, back then they called it the key tile, is ready to be placed in position that the mosaic is truly complete, tying all the other tiles together and giving the finished piece its visual voice. As you can now see on stage, all those musical mosaic tiles in the form of each of our musicians are now assembled to carry on an old Gaelic proverb that says, "The world may pass away, but love and music will endure." And that is what we do today. But there's something missing. That key tile I mentioned that will complete today's musical mosaic, bind these talented forces together and give this symphonic art form its musical voice. A daunting task for anyone, but rest assured, he's waiting in the wings. Please welcome to the podium music director and conductor, Mark Sforzini.
Thank you for joining us tonight at the Palladium Theater for the opening of our season. Tonight's program is entitled Heroes and Villains. We picked that title because the second half includes Beethoven's Eroica Symphony, the heroic, and we'll talk a little bit about the heroism in that piece on the second half. The villains come from The Night on Bald Mountain, which is a tone poem about the celebration of evil demons that take over the planet on the night of June 23rd. So that's the heroes and villains. But this program could also be subtitled Adventures in Programmatic Music, because all three pieces are significant as they pertain to what programmatic music is. Back in the 18th century, composers like Haydn and Mozart were content to just let the pure musical elements speak for themselves. But with Beethoven's Third Symphony, we see a beginning of a trend to write pieces that have a specific program associated with them. So the Beethoven Eroica was one of the first great pieces that had a programmatic idea associated to it. The Night on Bald Mountain, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about why that piece is so significant in a moment. And then, of course, we have a piece written by a living composer, which I think is significant in itself, but it is also your choice. If you were here for our Call for Scores competition last January, you may recall the winner of our International Call for Scores Audience Choice Award was this piece, the Angus Davison Laws of Motion. So we are paying attention to what you want to hear. And we're so excited to give the world premiere of this piece. The three short movements are each related to one of Newton's laws of motion. The first one is about equal and opposite reactions. For every reaction, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So this is demonstrated by the composer essentially in the direction the instruments play. You'll hear the woodwinds and strings go down, and so what do you think the brass does? Up. So let's just play a few bars at the beginning, if we could please, orchestra, at the beginning of the laws of motion. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay. The second movement, force equals mass times acceleration. What the composer emailed me, and it's so nice to have the composer alive, I could write to him and say, can you explain a little bit more about this F equals M times A? And he said, so basically, the mass is adding more instruments in the orchestra as the movement continues, and it happens at an accelerating rate. So what you can expect to hear in the second movement is it starts very thinly textured, just a solo, lonely little oboe with a little accompaniment in the strings. But the whole movement adds instruments until it really takes on a very emotional climax where the entire orchestra is playing. So that's the force equals mass times acceleration. The third movement, based on Newton's first law, is basically an object at rest tends to stay at rest unless acted upon by a force. So in this case, as the movement begins, the triangle acts upon the bassoon to say something. And then the triangle acts upon the piccolo to say something. And we're going to just show you how this works. Strings don't play yet. So just the triangle and those instruments at the beginning. So the triangle acts upon these instruments, they speak. However, the tendency is that they don't want to move, and so the strings react with an overwhelming stop to try to stop the motion. So let's add the strings in. Okay, so that's the trying to resist the motion. But what happens is sections keep acting upon other sections until everything gets in motion. And then once something's in motion, what does it tend to do? Stays in motion. So everything builds to this really groovy dance where everybody can't help but join the fun. So this is Angus Davison's world premiere of The Laws of Motion. Mussorgsky wrote his Night on Bald Mountain in 1867, and he showed it to his friend and mentor, Balakirev, and the guy looked at it and said, "This is garbage." And so it didn't get played, and Mussorgsky tried a couple other versions of Night on Bald Mountain for some different settings of instruments, and none of them got played, and he died. And then in 1886, 5 years after his death, there was this movement of Russian composers. They were sort of looking at all of Mussorgsky's writings, because he could write some good tunes, right? And they were like do-gooders. They felt like, these were really good tunes, and he just didn't quite set them in the right way. So we're going to rewrite his works for him and, publish them as sort of like orchestrations or arrangements. So Rimsky-Korsakov did this sort of reworking of Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain. And that's what we're about to play for you now. I did look at the original, because when I wanted to program the piece, I said, well, let's take a look at what the original was like. And I looked at it and I said, it's not quite right for our orchestra. We're going to do the Rimsky-Korsakov version. So, but what's interesting is when Mussorgsky wrote it in 1867, it was the first Russian tone poem. Remember me telling you about programmatic music, and composers in Europe like Franz Liszt, they had started writing these single movement works that had a programmatic theme to it. It was about telling a story. It was about a programmatic theme. So Mussorgsky sort of actually wrote the first tone poem, even though nobody played it. He wrote it. And what I find is so incredible is that this Rimsky-Korsakov version got picked up by Disney in 1940 and included in Fantasia. So now the whole world knows the Night on Bald Mountain, but Mussorgsky never even heard it performed, right? So it's like this really significant work, I think. And we're celebrating the fact that we actually have a member of the orchestra who saw the premiere in 1940. That's Richard Eliason from our double bass section. Saw the premiere of the original Fantasia in 1940. Are we getting it right? Are we getting the piece right? Yeah. Oh, maybe we're not getting the piece right. Are we doing a good job with the piece? Are we getting the piece right? Yeah. Yeah, he says we're getting it right. Yes. Okay, he says we're getting it right. So I find it just fascinating that this piece of music, never heard by the composer Mussorgsky, has gone on in its reorchestrated form by Rimsky-Korsakov to be a very famous and familiar piece. Now, what is it about? On an event called St. John's Eve, which takes place June 23rd and is celebrated in the British Isles and in Europe, the evil demons come forth to control the planet for a night. So that's the Night on Bald Mountain. And how is this represented in the music? Well, the appearance of the demon god is sounded by the trombones and bassoons and low strings. So can we hear what that sounds like when the demon god appears? Can we do that at measure 14, please? Recognize that tune? Yeah, and I'm very pleased to say that my interpretation of when the demon god appears is the same as Fantasia's. If you watch the Fantasia, then right when you hear that theme, the big demon god appears. All right, and the only thing that's missing from that is all the witches and goblins and ghouls chattering and gossiping. So let's go from bar 12. We're going to add in the violins and the upper woodwinds. They're the goblins, ghouls, and witches. Let's go from bar 12 and bass drum. All right, everybody from bar 12, 2, 1, and... Very good. All right, so that kind of gives you a little bit of the setting of what you're about to hear. Now, Mussorgsky uses an effect, I think, that's very interesting at one point during the section called the Black Mass. He has some of the string players play with the wood of the bow instead of the string of the bow. And it makes a sound to me that makes me think of skeletons, which are very appropriate for Halloween. Seconds and violas, can we hear your col legno with the wood of the bow at letter H, 2, 1 and 2. Yeah, that's it. Spooky, right? Spooky stuff. All right, so everything goes along swimmingly well for all the forces of evil until the village church bell chimes that dawn is coming. And then the spirits disperse. And we're going to demonstrate the chimes, and then the violins represent the spirits dispersing. Let's go to, I think that's W, right? Let's go to W. Dispersing demons. This is a mere murmur of their raucous evil dance from earlier, right? They're empowered, they're losing their power, they are dispersing as the dawn is coming. And then after this is a beautiful clarinet solo and a beautiful flute solo. I'll leave it to your imagination what you think those things might represent. So in honor of Halloween, which was yesterday, we play for you now Mussorgsky's with the Rimsky-Korsakov arrangement of Night on Bald Mountain.
you.